Hey, what's up guys? My name is Josh and welcome to a rainy day, finally, in Washington. Okay, so this is the Abyss Diana V2. And I want to lay out exactly what this is because I've seen a couple comments and a couple of people have asked me, and I want to make it very clear where this is in the line and what it represents. So I've heard some people think that because the V2, it's actually the successor or the bigger brother to the Phi. That isn't actually the case. This is the successor to the Abyss Diana. That's it. Just the Abyss Diana is what it was. The Phi came out, and the Phi was considered an upgrade or kind of the premium version of that line, but it was a very different headphone. And then they got rid of the original Diana and came out with the Diana V2. And from what I know, this is actually closer in DNA to the Diana Phi than it is the V1. So close in DNA that there is only two differences between this headphone and the Diana Phi. That is going to be the trace on the actual driver itself and the substrate. The substrate material is slightly different. Now, if you look, you can actually see the difference just in the color. There's also a little bit less foam on this one. This one is obviously yellow on this kind of all black V2. And then on the Phi, you actually have sort of a kind of an opalescent purple and blue kind of, not sure if this is going to show up. Hopefully it does. The driver is slightly less visible, but it's got kind of this purple and blue look to it. They're both beautiful, but honestly, the V2, I think with the black and the yellow, I think it looks pretty sick. So if you haven't caught it, I have done a first impressions and a full review of the Diana Phi. So I'll be talking a little bit about that here, but I do want to save the comparisons for either the review or possibly a second video if I think it's necessary. So both of these have the DMS modded pads on them, which are basically the same pads, except they're a little bit thinner on top and a little bit thicker on bottom. And for heads like mine, they actually conform to be a little bit more comfortable. Now, the design, similar to the actual Phi, is a very, very slim planar. Like, the thickness of this design is like a cell phone. And that is reflected in the weight, which for the V2 is 350 grams. For reference, both the Phi and the HD800S are 330 grams. So very light headphones, which is good because they don't offer a lot of padding, specifically not in this area. They do have a pad that you can buy and attach onto this if you choose to. I don't think it's necessary personally for me, but some people do get bothered by kind of hot spots on the top of their head. I'm not one of them, like I said, but the option is available either way. Now, similar to the Phi, I would pretty much list the comfort of this to be average. It's not particularly comfortable. It's not uncomfortable. It's kind of just somewhere in the middle. So regarding the sound, I want to talk a little bit about my expectations because I got the Phi before I ever heard the V2. And I want to talk about how those are met and sort of how they weren't met. So what I was anticipating was a less resolving Diana Phi. And in some ways that is true, but it's also a lot different than, like, the changes are a lot more substantial than just a less resolving version of the same headphone. In fact, auditorily, these seem like completely different headphones in some ways. In some ways they do align, but I find there's more different between these two headphones than there is similar. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The most notable change is the fact that the V2 is warmer. Quite notably warmer too. It is also a little bit less concerned about being a hyper-technical, detailed monster machine like the Phi is. And is a little bit more concerned about producing a pleasing sound signature. Now, to say that, it would be to almost sound like this is not technical, and that would not be the case. This is a very technical headphone when it's just by itself, but when it has kind of the bigger brother Phi, it seems a little bit less technical, but it's kind of like comparing how fast two bullets are. It's like both are pretty fast. Okay, so I would like to explore the differences of these a little bit more, but I do want to save that for a different video, especially because I really want to hone down how I feel about this, then compare kind of my findings between the two, and then I want to be able to represent confidently what I think between the two. So I want to put a little bit more listening time before I do that. So that's going to be the end of the Diana Phi comparisons. Now the V2 here is seemingly achieving both a very intimate experience, a very natural experience, and a very detailed experience. It's still a very technical headphone, but it's got a little bit of that added warmth to kind of make things a little bit more enjoyable and inviting. Now the treble response I actually would probably consider to be best in class. Is it present? Yes. Is it detailed? Yes. Does it have peaks? No. It is very even, and there doesn't seem to be any weird frequency spikes or weird resonance issues that are present with most of the other planars that I've heard, even in the top end. All of them have their sort of small little minor issues, little minor inconsistencies, or things that are not particularly enjoyable. And this doesn't really have anything like that. It's definitely present, so those of you who don't want to hear any treble at all, this is not going to be your headphone, but it's not overly sharp or overly harsh in really any category. It is what I would consider to be a fantastic reference point. Maybe not the best reference point, but a pretty good start. Now, as a treble reference point, I would say that this is natural, present, and full, but doesn't sound sterile or cold. And that's going to be where that slightly warmer tilt comes in. And that even introduces itself a little bit in the treble response. Now the mids here are so far the biggest improvement over the Phi. And that's all I'll say against the Phi, but they are very nice. They're not quite as forward, not quite as intimate as something like an HD 600, but they're closer to that than they are something like an HD 800. So they're going to be much more kind of in your head, much more personal, and in my opinion, much more pleasing than a lot of other headphones. And because of how the treble response is handled so smoothly, when it gets into those upper T and S regions that are unfortunately unpleasant with a lot of headphones, this kind of glides over them. You still get the information, but it doesn't have this weird forwardness issue that so many other headphones have. And I think for the intimate delivery of this headphone, that is very necessary, is not to have anything in the frequency response that is causing kind of audio issues or unpleasant issues with the vocal range. So you get detail, you get isolation, you get intimacy, but you don't get something that is too forward to be pleasing. So bass response for me so far is both a hit and a miss. On one hand, it's very clean. On the other hand, it's not a lot. And I would kind of equate this also to the 800S in terms of quantity, but not quality. Quality here is far better. This is a far faster and far cleaner bass response than something like the 800S. It's also more even. However, it doesn't have a lot of quantity behind it. It doesn't have a lot of oomph and a ton of guts behind it. Although total speed is very admirable. Those of you who like stronger planars, you can EQ this thing to hell with bass. you can really make it a bassy experience if you want to, but it doesn't come like that out of the box. So it's not what I would consider to be a thin headphone at all. It sounds very full, but it's not an overly lush headphone either. Now, some changes I would like to discuss a little bit further in future videos, but I'm not going to delve into here between the Diana Phi and the V2 are things like sound stage and imaging differences, the difference in timbre characteristics, the difference between a more technical detailed response and a slightly more warmer, enjoyable response, I would say. I would like to get into these more. I would also like to know any questions that you have between the two. So initial conclusions of this. This headphone feels like very precise, but with very little compromise. And when you're paying as much as you would be for this headphone, that's exactly what you want. So far, so good. Okay, guys, thank you very much for watching. Until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off. Hope you guys have a great Labor Day. It's not Labor Day yet. It'll probably be after Labor Day when this gets out. Whatever. I hope you had a great Labor Day. All right. Bye.